Okay, good morning, everybody. So Wednesday, the 10th, 10th of June. I was a bit perturbed. I saw an early exchange with Graham. It said 13th, and I thought 13th, and I realised that must have been 13th of May when I was speaking, and I was just looking at the 13th. I thought, what's the 13th about? I couldn't work it out. So anyway, Graham has is a regular attendee in terms of speaking with the BBF. Over the last few years. It hasn't been with us for a couple of years, but we always like the fact that Graham, as an internet psychologist, has always shared his thoughts with us about what we are wrong in thinking, and in terms of how so many people think this is the way. And when you read so many articles, and it's so misleading, and the reality, which Graham is always up to speed with in terms of the statistics, in terms of what is working and what is not working. And I'm sure that with lockdown, it's introduced us to a totally different way of thinking, which will probably change the way we are going to use the internet and social media in the future in a way that works. And Graham will share ideas, and Graham, I'll let you decide whether or not you want to be interrupted, whether you how interactive you want it to be, whether you want it at the end or whatever. So hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm glad we got the right day, because otherwise I could have been waiting until the 13th, and you could all been sitting here wondering where I was. So I'm glad we sorted that out. I've got some slides which I'll take you through in a minute, but I'm happy to be interrupted. That's fine. So if I say something and you want clarification, or you disagree, or whatever, then you've got a comment, then just say so. But I've allowed enough time, hopefully, for us to have a chat after I've gone through the slides. So that's my plan. I hope that works for you. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen. Give me a sec. I'll press the right buttons, and hopefully you should now be seeing some slides. Yeah. Good. Okay. So what I want to talk about is we labelled this the digital future. Are you locked in? And basically we're all locked in. But what I want to do is see, are we locked into what we need to do to the digital future, or are we going to do something in our businesses which is not going to help us with what is inevitably going to be a different future for us going forward? And that different future has arisen because of this nasty little creature. And it's obviously very disruptive. So it's disrupted your lives, it's disrupted everybody's lives, it's disrupted what you do. So, you can't meet face to face anymore. You're having to have Zoom meetings. So everybody's business, everybody's education, everybody's health, everything is completely disrupted by this tiny little varmint of which you could fit 500,000 on the head of a pin. So it's certainly making dramatic changes to your business, and is going to make dramatic changes going forward, because the scientists tell us that whatever happens over the next few months, as hopefully the R number recedes and so on, inevitably this virus is going to be around, and there are several scientists saying that a vaccine is unlikely, and even if it is, it will probably only be as effective as the flu vaccine, and the flu vaccine itself is variable in its efficacy from year to year as the virus changes. So we know, for example, already there are several different varieties of COVID-19 circulating within the UK. So it's mutating even, as we speak, as it were, and so the vaccine might not necessarily work. So we're going to be in a situation where this pretty nasty virus is going to be with us for quite a long time. So that means it's going to have an impact beyond the lockdown period, and that's going to be inevitable for us. So it's going to disrupt everything we do, and we've got to prepare for that. I think a lot of business people I speak with are preparing to return to normal sort of any moment now. It ain't going to happen. We're never going to return to what we had before, and we have to face that as a real reality going forwards in our business. Some of the impact that you see is you will have seen graphs like this, I'm sure. So January, the stock exchanges were bobbing along. They were all doing pretty nicely, and they went up and down as normal. But then suddenly we get to end of Feb and everything completely plummeted. And now most stock exchanges are about 20% of where they were, which means businesses the world over are 1/5 less valuable than they were at the beginning of the year. And when you're 1/5 less valuable, you've got less money to invest, you can employ fewer people, you can not do as much R&D. There's a whole raft of things that happen as a result of the value of your business collapsing in this way. So all across the world, businesses are going to be suffering for quite a long time. They're not going to rebuild that value in their business as quickly as they lost it. So we've seen figures like this repeatedly now for several weeks whilst we've been locked in. And we saw this graph a little while ago, or you may have seen this graph. So there was the Eurozone happily growing bit by bit. We had a big nasty drop when we had the 2008 big recession, but the first quarter of this year is worse than that. So the financial figures that we're seeing are that we're in a worse financial position now worldwide. This is Europe, but it's much the same across the world. We're in the worst financial position now than we were 12 years ago when we had the big financial crash. So that's not good for us in business either. And then we see headlines like this. So there you are, you've recovered as a bank from 2008, and suddenly you've got no money because literally within weeks your profits have been wiped out effectively. So we see headlines like this. And then a little while ago, we discovered that France, Italy, and Spain were all gone into recession. And we know that Germany is now in recession. We're in recession. So it's all pretty dire statistics and pretty dire figures in terms of what's happening financially. And we've been seeing headlines like this all over the place, haven't we? Will this be the worst downturn since the Great Depression? The worst economic crisis since the 1930s? The corporate insolvencies are falling. So everything is going from bad to worse to worse. And we're surrounded by a constant series of negative headlines. This morning, the owners of Wagamama and Frankie and Benny's, they've got some other brands in their portfolio, are going to have to shut 120 of their restaurants across the UK because they simply can't afford to reopen them. So every day we're getting financial announcements from businesses that they're closing down, they're shutting down, they're not reopening their stores, all kinds of negative stuff that's happening to us in terms of business. And that's kind of not a very good environment for us to be thinking about the future in. And so what do? We go, well, I don't want to hear any more of this. We stick our fingers in areas and go, la, 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 and try and carry on. And because of all this negativity. And so that's a real problem for business, because actually we have to listen to that negativity. We have to listen to what it's telling us in order for us to make plans for the future. So if we keep sticking our fingers in the air in areas and pretend that it's not happening, we're not going to be able to do the right things to get out of it going forward. So one of the things to do is to turn to mathematics. And there's a thing in maths called the Elliott wave. And I remember the Elliott wave very well because my son is called Elliot. So it's really easy for me to remember the Elliott wave. And this is the Elliott wave. So it's a bit of maths. And what it does is it says that as something rises and then there's a dramatic fall, the next rise reaches a peak which is higher than the previous peak. So you can see that this wave gets bigger and bigger. And it's the kind of mathematics that you see maybe on the beach at Eastbourne. You can see I'm on the beach at Eastbourne today, but it's the kind of thing you see as the first wave comes in, the next wave gets bigger, the next wave gets higher, the next wave gets higher, and then it all collapses again, and then it all builds up again. So the Elliott wave is the mathematics of that kind of thing. And the Elliott wave just doesn't appear on Eastbourne Beach or anywhere you might go surfing. Do you go surfing on Eastbourne Beach? Probably not. You do. but the wave goes higher. Each peak is bigger than the previous one. And guess what? We see the Elliott wave in the stock exchange. So this is the FTSE. So ever since the current version of the FTSE came out in 1984, you can see that it rises, it goes down, it rises again. And as we get to the next peak, it's higher than the previous peak. So we're currently, you see the little dot on the right-hand side here, we're currently just emerging from that big dip that happened a little while ago. And what's inevitable is that it's going to go higher, because the mathematics tells us that the stock exchange will be higher. So it was about 7,500. The FTSE index was about 7,500 at the beginning of the year. So inevitably what's going to happen once we're out of this financial doldrums that we're in, it is inevitably going to be higher than 7,500 once we hit the next peak, because that's the mathematics of it. So it is inevitably going to get better. We can see those peaks matched against the recessions that we've had. So you had the recession in the mid-80s, and then the one in the late 90s. And then we had the next one in 2002, and then 2008. There was now an acknowledged recession in 2016, which was kind of a small one. And you can see that every time there's a recession, guess what? The finances are better after the recession than when we went in. So the Elliott wave tells us that whatever's going to happen after this current financial situation we're in, it is going to get better. So one thing we know is that after COVID-19, it's all going to be okay. So we may be locked in and worried and so on, but the problem is the science is telling us that that time is going to be a year or two away. Well, that's good, because it means we've got real time now to plan what we're going to do in what people are calling the new normal. It gives us time now to think about what we're going to do in that future. So we've got time to plan. We've got time to think. We've got time to analyze our markets and our situation. So I think that's giving us a real opportunity to take advantage of what this next big peak of the next wave is going to be. So how do we respond then as businesses to this kind of disruption? And it's really useful to look at examples of how businesses respond to when something disrupts their work. Every business has been through some kind of disruption. We're now all experiencing the same kind of disruption. And so this new disruption is something that we're all sharing. So other businesses may have had disruption to their markets or to their products or services, but now we're all experiencing something together. And so what we need to do is look at how businesses generally handle disruption. And the problem is they don't do very well with it. So one good example of that is the hard disk sector. So here's a typical computer hard disk that you might find in a desktop computer. And most of those are 5¼ inch hard disks, but they didn't start like that. And so this is a hard disk from a company called Western Digital, which is one of the 2 leading hard disk manufacturers now, but they didn't start in the hard disk market. The people who started with hard disks were IBM. And this was one of the first IBM hard disk drives. It was a 14-inch drive, and you can see it was so big it's got wheels on the bottom. So this was a hard disk that was external to the computer. It weighed, I can't remember how many dozens of kilos, but it was a massive, great big device that had to be manhandled around your office. You can see a big kind of hook on the right-hand side, which is where you kind of put the handle to drag it around. So it's a massive, great big device, and it was 14 inches. So it's a big, unwieldy kind of thing. And when people started talking about making them smaller, IBM asked its customers, and its customers said, no, we don't want a smaller device. Why do we need a smaller device? Everything's working fine. Why do we need a smaller device? Now, the one thing about asking your customers what they want is it's useless. It's completely useless to ask your customers what they want. Imagine that you're an optician and you say to your customers, what would you like in terms of making your sight better? And they say, well, I tell you what, I'd just like the glasses to not have scratches on the front, or I'd like my spectacles to not steam up when, I open the oven door, or something like that. And so you say, no, I've got a better idea. I'll tell you what, I've got a piece of plastic. It's really tiny. And what you do is you stick it in your eye. Now, of course, I do that every day because I wear contact lenses. But if an optician had come out to people and said, do you want, the people wouldn't want contact lenses. They wouldn't tell their optician they want something to stick in their eye. And yet for millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world, that's a better alternative than spectacles. And so if you ask your customers what you want, they'll very rarely tell you what they really need. And so asking your customers as IBM, when other people were beginning to talk about miniaturizing this, was the wrong step. So what happened was IBM didn't go into the smaller size market. So they missed out on this disruption. And we ended up eventually with this kind of thing. So now we can stick more data on a little device like this that you stick in your camera than you did with those big things that went round the floor of the office. And guess what? IBM aren't in this market. IBM aren't in this market, completely disrupted memory storage market. And IBM, because they were asking their customers what do you want and worried about delivering slightly better performance from their existing products, meant that they missed out on the disruption that was happening in their marketplace. And when you look at what happened in the storage marketplace, we start with IBM and their 14-inch devices, which goes nowhere for them. And Seagate come along and they introduced the 5 1/4-inch drive. But they cancelled their 3.5-inch project because they did exactly the same. They spoke to their customers and their customers said, why would we need a smaller hard disk? It's just inside the computer. It doesn't matter what size it is to us. But of course, the 3.5-inch drive leads you to greater miniaturization, smaller desktops, whole variety of benefits to customers, which the manufacturers of hard drives didn't pinpoint. So Connor comes along and says, well, why don't we make it even smaller, make it 2.5 inches? And so people say, why would you need a 2.5-inch drive? Well, that's because you can make lighter and smaller laptops. And then along come Trek 2000, a Singapore company, and say, well, why do we need hard drives at all? Why don't we have USB drives? And you can see that each time previous companies didn't get into the disruption because they were too busy trying to make their existing products and services better rather than looking at the better opportunities and changing what they're doing. So when you look at all of these companies, they didn't predict the future very well, and they didn't predict the disruption that was happening to them. And so now my slides have stopped. There we go. So when you look at their predictions, if you look at their forecast of the 14-inch drive, they got pretty much what they were expecting. So the blue line's saying their forecast, they forecasted 100%, say, of the market, and they got 100% of the market. So they then think about the 5 1/4-inch drive, and they think, well, that market is going to be this amount, 100%, and they got nearly 300%. And so they completely got the market prediction wrong. They got the market prediction completely wrong for 3.5-inch drives. There was a bigger market than they expected. So now they've started to get into thinking, aha, everybody wants smaller drives. So a 1.8-inch drive was invented. And guess what? They got that wrong in the other direction, because they went, well, everybody's going after smaller drives. Because by this time, people didn't want a 1.8-inch drive because they had USB sticks. So they didn't need, there was no need for that in the marketplace. So what we're seeing throughout this is that everybody's ability to predict the future and to predict what to do with the disruption is really, really poor. So actually, what we can see is that businesses are really useless at predicting the future. So all the data on how businesses predict the future and what we're meant to do is pretty useless. So here we are in a point of our business where the future is definitely going to change, and we have to predict it in order to come out of this lockdown to be better. And if we don't get that right, we're going to be in trouble. And predicting the future as businesses is really a problem, because what we do is we spend our life on what's called sustained innovation. We spend our life trying to improve our existing products and services rather than thinking about things that are going to be dramatically different to what we're doing. We stick with what we think is safe, and that turns out not to be very good for us. So here's some predictions for you, just to see how good business people are at predicting. So Professor Dionysius Lardner said that rail travel wasn't possible at high speed because we'd all die of asphyxia. Well, that worked out well as a prediction, didn't it? What about Sir William Preece, who was the chief engineer of the post office, who ran telephones here, of course. The Americans have need for the telephone, but we don't because we have messenger boys. Well, that worked well for us, didn't it? Popular Mechanics magazine, still in existence, told us that computers would weigh no more than 1.5 tons. Well, I'm glad I haven't got that in my pocket at the moment. Yeah, so that was a good prediction. Time magazines told us that remote shopping would flop. Yep, tell that to Jeff Bezos. So that was a good prediction, wasn't it? And also, the chairman of Digital Equipment Corporation, now part of Hewlett Packard, said he couldn't see any. How am I saying that without moving my lips? I don't know. That was back in 1977. And then Robert Metcalfe, the inventor of Ethernet. So that's the cable that connects you to the internet. The whole internet depends on Ethernet. And he said in 1995 that it would collapse catastrophically. So there's the person on which the internet is based, essentially. And he predicted, back in 1996 that the internet was going to collapse, that it couldn't happen. So here we've got people who are these are experts. These are people who should know what they're talking about, who clearly can't predict the future. Even Lord Sugar can't predict the future, because back in 2005, he said the iPod would be dead, finished, gone kaput by Christmas in 2005. The current 8th generation of the iPod was launched by Apple in the middle of 2019 and is still selling in its millions. So Lord Sugar was not very good at predicting the market either. So we've got business people no good at predicting markets, people who know technology markets not doing it, people who know computing not being able to predict the future of computing, and here you are asking me to predict your digital future. Yeah, well, good luck with that. So when we look at the future, we need to look at some data, because when we start looking at data, we can start getting some ideas about what we could be doing. So if we look at the current situation, over the 10 years to 2018, the proportion of online retailing went up significantly. So back in 2008, about 5% of all items that we buy were bought online. And by the time we got to 2018, it was about 17, 18%. So still most items are bought in physical stores. And so most of the online shopping that we do is for restricted categories, and that most of everything we buy is bought in real world stores. So that's where we were in 2018. And I spend half my life as a lecturer at the University of Buckingham. And this is one of the charts I show my students who do this module on the digital economy. And it shows that you can see over the years from 2012 to 2017, that the amount of online shopping has gradually increased across Europe. UK proportionally does more online shopping than any other country in the world. We are avid online shoppers here in the UK, so way ahead of America. And so we spend a lot. 90% of all households in the UK buy something from Amazon every week. So we are mad on internet shopping. But even then, the amount that we're doing is still only up at, the 15, 16, 17%. We can see it growing at that amount. It's been growing steadily over the years. Right. We thought we reached a peak, but we haven't. Was somebody trying to interrupt me then?
Yeah, Graham, can I just ask, that CAGR on the far right, is that compound annual growth?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So it's showing us that the growth on average is about 15% over those years. And when we look at the graph on the left, you can see that the growth rate from 2010 to 2018 was actually slowing down. So it looked like everybody in the online retail sector was looking like that we'd reached a peak. We'd probably reached the amount of shopping that people were going to do online, and that we'd reached sort of 18%. There was a marginal amount of growth happening by the time after that previous graph, after 2017, but the growth was slowing right down. And in those countries where we did lots of shopping, so the slowing in growth of online shopping was much greater in the UK than anywhere else. So what it looks like is that the UK had really taken on board online shopping way ahead of every other country. Other countries were catching up, and then in those countries that were having high rates of online shopping, they were slowing down. So it looked like there were kind of around 20% of what we bought was going to be bought online and everything else was going to happen offline. And then comes 2019. You can see on the graph on the right, 2019, the growth rate was falling again. So it's more evidence that we'd reached a peak, that was where we're going to go. Now where we are in 2020, suddenly way up. So suddenly everybody's at home and people, you're doing the same. You're probably shopping loads. I did an Amazon order last night. I'm sure somebody else on here will have done online shopping yesterday. So the amount of growth in online shopping is now way, way, way ahead of anywhere it's ever been in the last 25 years. So we are witnessing masses of online shopping. And that's really important in terms of going forward. Because if we look at the proportion of sales, so there we were back in January, on the left-hand side, the proportion of sales around about 17%. And just by the time we got to March, you can see that slice of the pie has grown bigger. And so just in the space of 2 months, the space growing bigger. That pie is now growing round our little dial. And so what we're seeing is more and more people doing online shopping. People who never did online shopping before realizing that they can do it. So one of the most important things that has happened as a result of lockdown is that people have realized that shopping online is okay. Those people who didn't trust it before now trust it. Those people who didn't use it very much before just did the occasional bit of shopping and are doing regular shopping. What it means from a psychological perspective is that people are very happy to shop online and they're going to continue to do it. So one important factor for every business is that people are going to expect to buy your stuff online post COVID-19. So one thing we've got to realize is that it's no longer the 20%. We're looking at, so the current data that I've seen is looking at something like 40, 45, maybe even 50% of everything we buy being bought online. And that's services, products, business to business, everything. In every study I've seen of business to business buyers, the one thing they want from their suppliers is for, and I quote from one study, we wish the suppliers' websites would work like Amazon. And so people are now, we've had 3 months, we're going to have longer than this, online shopping, people are going to get used to it. They're going to expect this to be happening going forward. The convenience of it, all of those kind of things. And now the increased trust means that one thing we're going to need to do in business going forward is sell as much as we can online. Even if you didn't do it before, we've got to go that way now. Just an indication of what's going on. Back in March, Amazon said it was going to hire 100,000 extra staff just to cope with the additional orders. I spoke to one of our delivery drivers here a couple of weeks ago, and he said since the lockdown in March, every day has been like the week before Christmas at our local Amazon warehouse. And so he's saying the amount of orders, the amount of stuff they're doing, it's way, way, way beyond anything they've ever done before. And so they're just overrun with orders constantly. And so 100,000 extra staff Amazon was going to employ in March, bringing their total staff around the world to 900,000 people. That doesn't include, by the way, their contractors. So this 100,000 extra staff doesn't include the people who are maybe their freelance drivers, who are maybe driving for them 2 or 3 days a week just to get some extra pocket money, as it were. Doesn't include those. They're contracted. These are 100,000 extra full-time staff just to cope with the amount of work that Amazon was having to do. So that was in March. By the time we get to April, they were going to have to employ another 75,000. So just 1 month later, they had to employ another 75,000 people. This is just an indication of the amount of online shopping. I mean, we can't imagine the amount that's going on. About a year ago, Amazon was selling around $5,000 a second worldwide. It's currently about $8,000 a second. So massive. I mean, can you imagine how many orders that is? I mean, it's just the amount of stuff they're doing is phenomenal. And then that's repeated through many other businesses online who are showing us that people have really got into online shopping in a massive way. So massive that companies like this in Milton Keynes, so these are little robots in Milton Keynes. The people in Milton Keynes see these a lot now. and these are driving around the streets delivering things because we can't employ enough people. So Amazon has a huge warehouse in Milton Keynes. I think it's the biggest warehouse in the UK. And these delivery trucks are also delivering food. They're delivering a whole variety of things. And these little robots just deliver stuff to your house. You open them with an app, and you get your parcel or your food out of them. And so we're going to see increasing numbers of these. There are now several cities in the USA that use these little robots. And so we're going to see increased robotic delivery of things. We've got, for example, Domino's Pizza now deliver pizza by robots in several places. So we're going to see increased robotic delivery, increasing the amount of shopping we do because we can get it where we want, when we want. We haven't got to worry about people, having to work shifts and so on. So we're going to see more and more people being able to use more and more services online because we're going to have better ways of delivering things. And these robots have been working in Milton Keynes for about 3 or 4 years now. And they're now, a regular part of the world of Milton Keynes. So people who come out of Milton Keynes and don't see the robots are a bit surprised that other towns and cities aren't using them. Now, one other thing that we know, of course, I said we need to look at data, is the amount of flights. So we can't go anywhere. We can't, if we come here, we've got to isolate for 14 days. And so you can see that the number of flights has just plummeted, and we know that people aren't going anywhere. That's a problem, of course, because that means we have to do more and more business online. But that's also another theoretical impact. So there you are, some of you in Eastbourne or thereabouts, but how far do you go from Eastbourne to do your shopping? Well, here's a graph. That graph is centered on Mike's office. So the white dot in the middle is Mike's office. That's the postcode of his office. And the circle is 11 miles distant outside. Now, I'm quite sure that you don't go shopping, Mike, in the middle of the channel, but the chances are you do most of your physical shopping in the land side. You might go shopping in Hastings occasionally, but probably not very much. And so most people actually don't do their shopping very far from home. So one of the things that's happening now is that the lack of flights is forcing us back home. And what we do know is that ties into another piece of theory called central place theory. This is a theory from geography, and geographical theory shows us that most people do most of their activities within 11 miles of their house. So something like 80 to 90% of everything you do is within 11 miles from your house. So not only are we going to have more online shopping, but we're going to have much more local business. People who may have flown to Paris for something, for a conference, are going to do it in Eastbourne. They're not going to go anywhere. They're going to be much more local. So one of the things that's going to happen as a result of COVID-19 is a greater increase of local business. So we're going to see online shopping increasing, and we're going to see local business increasing because people can't travel as much. So because they're forced to stay at home, the central place theory is going to have an even greater importance for us. So much more local business is going to happen as a result of fewer flights. And then, of course, we've got all this. Here we are, we're all on a Zoom call, and you can see that the share price in Zoom has, in January, there it was, same share price as, same level as kind of Netflix and Amazon has gone up by 27% by the time we got to May. Zoom, 131% increase in its share price. So that's in spite of that little dip in the middle of April, was when all the stuff about the security issues with Zoom arose, which they've subsequently resolved, so they tell us. So more and more people using Zoom all the time, hundreds of millions of Zoom calls every single day now. And so we're doing much more of this. So we're all seeing pictures like this. Yeah, you've got me on your screen and a group of other people on your screen. We're all seeing loads and loads of calls like this. I mean, the other day I sat here at 9 o'clock and I stopped using Zoom and Microsoft Teams at about 4:30 in the afternoon. And that was my day. And that's probably a lot of your days as well. So one of the things is we're going to see much more use of this. We've discovered what Zoom and Microsoft have been telling us for years, that actually you can use this to do business and do things. And only a tiny proportion of businesses actually bothered to dip their toe in the water. Whereas now everybody's been forced to do that. And we've discovered that it works and that we can run business and we can do things with it that we didn't realize that we could do. So because we've been exposed to this and we've discovered it works, we're going to end up doing more of it. Because Zoom lowers our costs, doesn't cost us as much to do the same business. It means it's much more flexible. We can get greater speed of decision making happening. We don't have to wait for people to drive to the office. We can get a decision made in a quick meeting with people all over the country or all over the world. And it means we can reach more people as a business. So Zoom has huge, or it doesn't just have to be Zoom, of course, it can be any video conference service, but it's giving us lots of opportunity to do things to reduce our costs, increase our reach, improve our flexibility, making our business better. And many business leaders like yourselves are realizing that, and you're going to be putting Zoom and other services like this into your plans for the future. So sustained innovation, that stuff that like IBM did, that didn't move to the next drive, that they didn't think of, the contact lens approach. Sustained innovation is going to be this. You're going to do a few more Zoom meetings. You're going to do a bit more working from home, and you're going to increase your sales online. But that's no good, because sustained innovation means that you don't take advantage of the disruption. All you do is just tweak what you're doing. So there's that line that, which isn't true, by the way, where Ford supposedly said, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd want faster horses. He never actually said that. That was a Harvard professor who said that he would have said that what he would have said if he'd asked that question. But you get the point that if you ask your customers what they want, they're not going to tell you very much. So your customers might say, well, sell things online. And your staff might say, can I work from home a bit more? And you might say, we'll introduce a few more Zoom meetings. That's doing the sustained innovation. That's the faster horses approach. And if we want to really take advantage of what we're doing, we can't do sustained innovation. We have got to disrupt. And that means we've got to do things that we might not like. It means that the notion of working 9 to 5 has got to go. It means that we've got to have people working whenever they want, wherever they want. It means that we've got to have major technology upgrades. We've got to make sure that the technology we use is going to work. And you've discovered, I'm sure, on Zoom calls and so on, that people's technology doesn't work a lot of the time. And we've got to decide that we're going to sell everything we do online in order to tap into what people really want. And so what the lockdown has really exposed is that most businesses have really poor infrastructure, that most businesses have got very poor technology skills, that there's inadequate training. How many of you have been trained to use Microsoft Word? How many of you have been trained to use Zoom? Or have you just picked it up? And we're discovering lots of people are not very good at technology. And our employment contracts are outdated because they don't take into account the new way of working, where we're going to have people working completely flexibly whenever they want, wherever they want. So there's some major things that are going to happen to our businesses in this digital future that we're going to face. So the only question I've got for you really now is, are you ready for the Elliott wave? Because that peak is coming and we've got to be prepared for it. And if all we do is sustained innovation, we're not going to be prepared for that big wave, because all the evidence from the past shows the people who are prepared for the next wave are the people who do disruptive innovation. They do things completely differently to the people before them. So if we want to take advantage of what's inevitably going to happen post-COVID, we have got to completely dramatically change the way we do business. So there you go, Mike. Those are my thoughts, and I guess now we can open it up to questions, to discussion, to whatever anybody wants to talk about.
Graham, I've got a question here. It's Robbie.
Hello, Robbie.
Yeah, hi there. So in the previous slide where you said there's a higher reach for businesses because of online, Zoom, etc. The slide before that said that there's going to be more local business. So it contradicted itself.
Well,
It's more local business. Could you just explain a little bit more about what that looks like in the future?
yeah. So the more local business is because people, because they can't travel, they will seek to do things more locally, obviously because they can't travel. But already within our heads is that we prefer to do things locally anyway. So all that's going to happen is it's going to confirm that we should spend more time on local business than going beyond, it's not going to be 11 miles for everyone, but they're, going beyond that kind of locality. However, higher reach is about the proportion of people within that locality that you will get to. So at the moment, you might get to, I don't know, 10% of people because you have meetings or face-to-face, but using online digital technology and that greater reach, you're going to reach 50%, 70% of that local population. So it's the proportion of the local population is the greater reach you're going to get.
Okay,
that make more sense now?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
So speculating then, Graham, on being more digital, I think in terms of selling more, I think we're going to get so much more used to visible and in terms of video. So, but yeah. I think what we can't do is ignore word, but word is going to have to probably be tighter, more descriptive, but always giving people the choice of video so people can choose whether they want. So looking at Judy there with her different types of building, she's going to almost like take people through by video on her brochure and explain it, but they could, so it's all going to still have pictures, but they're going to have the option. So people are going to have to make an awful lot more effort on their digital presence than they do at the moment.
Yeah, quite. So yeah, so people in, they'd say property, at the moment, some of them show videos, but we're going to need interactive 3D tours. We're going to need, 360-degree cameras. We're going to need the equivalent of, Google Street View for property. Google already does that for interiors of big buildings, so interiors of big shopping centers and so on. Google will take you around the interiors, but property businesses are going to need to do that for all their properties. So you see, you go on to say something like Zoopla, and it will show you 20 still photographs and an architect's drawing of the building. That's not going to be as good going forward. We're going to need much more. We're going to need the ability to click on the drawing and see a 360-degree view of the room that we've just clicked on the drawing, just like we do on Google Maps. So that technology has been around, but the fact that people are much more digital now means they're going to expect that from business services.
Yeah. So when Judy, I can't remember who it was working with Russell to tell a story. Was it Chris, or was it? I can't. It was some. You were encouraged to actually, you're not building an extension. What you're doing is actually helping construct somebody's dream, or sitting there with a gin and tonic in their hand, looking out into their garden, whatever. And somehow you had then got to educate that, because you might be exactly the same as any other builder, but nobody knows that, because if you actually say these are the steps we take, and this is the chance to actually personalize the experience digitally on there, which is easier said than done, of course. So this is where Graham is saying about looking at re-education and training in terms of skills, because just on our own team, we're having to rethink now how people will present accounts, for example, because you can't have it face to face. So it can't just be done at one level. It's the whole level of management figures should maybe be accompanied by videos, etc. So they will be presented video rather than just here's a spreadsheet, here's a set of figures. Actually look at presenting them differently. So it's a real challenge for us all to embrace this new way of thinking.
It is, and I think that's my point really. That a lot of people are not taking up that challenge, and they're going, well, we'll just tweak it here and there. But tweaking it here and there is the sustained innovation, and those people eventually get left behind. And so if we don't want to get left behind, we can't do sustained innovation now. We have got to take this disruption and disrupt and do things completely differently.
Yeah.
Can I say, Graham, great presentation, thank you. What's coming to my mind too about the disruption too, and your example of the opticians, is clients identifying the difference between what they want and what they need, and our job as business leaders is to help them, or help show them, or reveal what it is that they need above what they want. I loved one of your early pictures with the guy blocking his ears, the la la la. It's so true, but also in our experience, because we've actually grown through COVID, because people are tuning in to the disruptive thinking, and you know, we all cluster, don't we? We're all magnetically drawn to like-minded people, and they are going la 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 to all the bad negative news. They are watching it, they're taking it in, but they don't want to dwell on it, and they are very, very hungry out there in the jungle, looking for disruptive thinkers who will not keep reminding them of what's negative, who will go, right guys, let's bring it on. How are we going to innovate moving forwards? And we're a large part of that. And properties, I think the business property market, the commercial market, is going to absolutely plummet on the back of all that you said, evidence of people finding they can work at home. They're going to have agile working. They won't, even if they have office space, they're going to downsize massively. And the Bank of England are saying it's not this year that's the worry. It's going to be the middle of next year where we are just going to really, really feel the pain. And on the back, last comment, Mike, is it okay if I put up a flyer for hiring out my TV studio on the chat line? If not, I won't, but that's a large part of why we're doing so well. Of course, I've got a fully equipped TV studio which people want to obviously use to get all their videos up, so
by all means put it on the chat line.
Thank you.
So Simon, with your thing from a marketing angle, you are going to now have to become an influencer with your clients in terms of using the digital experience more than ever. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I already am an influencer, Mike. I know what you mean.
More of an influencer.
Yeah. No, you're right. And we are trying to steer our clients a bit more in that direction. And we've been pushing the messages out all whilst this has been going on. And then it's just looking at each one individually, because there's not a one size fits all for these kinds of things. So it's just trying to look at the best approach, how we tweak what we're doing, but also not abandoning some of what is already worked for them and still is working. So it's going to a lot of sort of testing and repeat and try it again over the next few months to see what works, I think.
Can I make a comment on Maxine? She's put, are people getting a Zoom fatigue? But there's also a health hazard with Zoom. People are getting more headaches, problem with their eyes. And so for people who don't know, I'm in private medical insurance, and I'm getting people contacting me because, you know, they want to sort of do more claim. And I've got to take it from personal experience myself. If I am on a Zoom meeting for more than a couple of hours, I do get headaches. And so, and I still think, like Maxine, that there is a place for both, sort of face-to-face and Zoom, do a mixture. And this is something that we've discussed with other groups, where there's definitely, you know, sort of going to be more Zoom and so on, but the face-to-face, and you need the face-to-face.
I mean,
you can't spend it. It's a health hazard.
I think certainly for a lot of what I do, it's a lot about being that trusted advisor. So for those who don't know, I'm in restructuring and turnaround. I'm an insolvency practitioner. So completely echo what Graham was saying about, you know, the Elliott wave. I've never heard of that before. So that was interesting. But I think that there is something about when you're advising clients, it's helpful to be sat in front of them, because then you know that you have their attention. It's easier to talk through things when you're there, and I think that isn't the same when you're on Zoom. And I think definitely the headaches that I completely get. But I think that come the end of the day, being on Zoom, especially when you then have to do family events and stuff on Zoom as well, you kind of actually, do you know what? I'm just checking out.
You're zoomed out. Yeah.
I had my first face-to-face potential client meeting yesterday, the first one for 3 months, and that was interesting experience. And felt a bit of trepidation going into it actually, and it was a case of I was given a face mask when I arrived, and that's the first time I've worn the face mask. I found my glasses were steaming up straight away. That was annoying. But then trying to actually read people's facials and also trying to express enthusiasm for all the things they're telling you when you've got a mask on is actually really difficult. And don't underestimate what a pain in the ass that's going to be.
Yeah, it's interesting that several studies show us that even people who are not deaf lip read. So we all lip read. So we don't realise we're doing it. And so as soon as you cover up people's mouths, it makes it much more difficult to understand what they're saying, even though we can hear them perfectly. And so we are psychologically taking in a whole load of inputs to work out what the communication is. But the tiredness issue, if you think of television presenters, you see them for, an hour a day and you think, God, what are they doing the rest of the day? They're lazy slugs. They don't do very much, but actually they're exhausted because it's really difficult sitting staring down a lens where you're not really moving. We tense our bodies. We don't move. Whereas in the office, in your face-to-face meeting yesterday, you would probably be leaning back in the chair. You do this. I can't do that on camera because you think, where's he going? If I suddenly lean back, apart from the fact I knocked my green screen over, but you see, it doesn't work, does it? So I have to sit here like this for an hour and a half or whatever it's going to be, and so everything is tense. Your eyes are focused in the same distance. You don't move your head. All of that contributes to poor health. So one of the things I mean about the flexibility of employment contracts, it may well be that your employment contract is not from 9 to 5, but your employment contract is just, as some digital businesses do, a bit like Google and a few others, they don't have times, they don't have holiday dates. All of those concepts have disappeared. Their contract is just, this is what you've got to achieve. And how you achieve it and when you achieve it is entirely up to you. And so the notion of holiday, the notion of going into the office and doing 9 to 5 business, it may well be that somebody comes in, does an hour and a half Zoom meeting, and that's their work for today. And they might write a report this evening when the kids have gone to bed. That's it. And so that's where we've got to get our thinking in terms of how we're using digital, because one of the tasks of an employer, of course, is to make sure they don't do anything that damages the health of their staff. So if we're expecting people to, as I had to do the other day, do a constant day of Zoom, I was exhausted by the end of that day. Okay? And it's unfair on our staff, but it's unfair on you. The whole way we use this technology, the way the technology works with us, it is making it difficult. So I've got a little device here for it. I'll just show you if I can grab it from here. Yeah. So this is a little device called a gimbal. And what that does is I can put the phone in there and then I can move and the camera will follow me.
Yes.
So if I lean back in my chair, the camera will follow me. If I decide to move to one side, the camera will follow me. So from the viewer's perspective, everything's in the same place. But that's for when I stick my phone in there to do things, whereas the camera I've got in front of me here is fixed. Okay, I can move the stand a bit. But so there are now new webcams that will do like a gimbal. So that means in order to make that work, to ease the health issues of sitting staring at the camera all the time, I've got to invest in new technology. But many people don't know that technology exists. And so this is what I mean about technological incompetence. We've got to keep up to date with these things. We've got to realize that we need to put these things into people's homes. So there's a whole load of stuff that we've got to do.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in the normal days, you would have had a day of back-to-back meetings, but you would have been travelling to those meetings. You would have probably had, 10 or 15 minutes to grab a quick coffee, have a phone call, or just have a couple of minutes to yourself. And I think when everyone, I certainly got very Zoom happy in the beginning. It was like, yeah, fine, we'll do back-to-back meetings, it's fine. But you need that time to stop. And also, I'm not used to sitting at my desk for 7.5 hours a day non-stop. Because we're out, we're talking to colleagues, we're going out to clients, whatever. So yeah, I think that yes, there's a room for both, but at the moment I'm ready for a break.
And, and also in those back-to-back meetings, your eyes would be focusing on different things, because you'd look at one person over there and another person over there. You might look at your notepad, you might stare into the distance. So your eyes are getting lots of change and rest, whereas now you're just staring at the screen. Your eyes are fixed, they don't get any rest. It's really tiring.
Great. Sorry, that was a brilliant presentation, absolutely fascinating. In the the bigger picture of things then, if we're going to go into this more Zoom-like world, and I can see all the benefits and I think it is brilliant, but the drawback, i.e. the roads, the office buildings that are there and everything, what's the grander scale on how this is going to work? If we're going to actually become smaller in our environment, we're not going to need to travel that much, or we may not choose to travel as much now. How is that all going to be kind of sorted out?
I don't know, but it's very interesting. Just up the road from here in Reading, there is a business park called Green Park, which is the biggest business park in Europe outside London, outside Canary Wharf. And so it's only about half built at the moment. You've got loads of companies. So PepsiCo have got their European headquarters there. You've got Bayer with its UK headquarters there. You've got, you've got Verizon, loads of big businesses there. It's just on the M4 as you approach Reading. And I went up there the other day because there's a Costco right on the edge of it. So I went to do some shopping and discovered that the entire business park, so you've got all these, big buildings, 10, 15-story office blocks all around the place. The whole area is completely sealed off with those, those cement barriers that they put in the roads. So nobody goes in or out. So PepsiCo, everybody from PepsiCo is working at home. Everybody from Bayer is working from home. And guess what? Those businesses who've paid for those offices are discovering they can operate their businesses perfectly okay without them.
Yes and no. Sorry to interrupt you, but our experience is saying from people that we're hearing is the answer to that is yes and no.
Yeah.
There are many people who are working from home, but we were talking earlier about if you like, salaries being paid outcome based as long as you get done. Number one, that depends on the business. There are some businesses where that isn't as easy as it is for others.
Yeah.
Also, what we are hearing, and I'm not a scientist, is that science is showing that the millennials, who are now obviously getting older, are really, really struggling to work from home because of focusing on the job in hand, which then puts them under stress on the outcome-based scenario, and also the importance of osmosis, of absorbing what's going on in and around the firm, from the culture, values to problems, what have you, just by being in an office space and overhearing stuff. That's going to cause tremendous disruption in the negative way on businesses moving forward, because you're cutting out osmosis, where you're automatically learning stuff which you need to know, i.e. overhearing a financial conversation or something, which is just going to be taken away. And I think there's a grey area that is going to bite the back of business if they don't address it. And that's the millennials struggling to be motivated at home, and osmosis learning from a business that because it's invisible, it will invisibly be missed as well, until almost not too late, but you're in big problems.
Yeah, I'd agree. One of the things that I saw you, Sarah, wave. Yeah, one of the things that that I would, your osmosis point, I'd call corporate memory. But one of the things we know is that corporate memory is now lower than it ever was.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that people don't bother to remember things anymore because they go, oh, it's on the intranet. So we don't have to bother to remember things. And so we make no attempt to remember those things. Whereas before there was no intranet, there was no database, it wasn't in the cloud or whatever. And so everybody had to be together to remember those things. So I get your point about that osmosis and that corporate memory and the way we do things. But the point about the millennials or the Gen Zs below them being able to work, I don't think that's an issue. That's an issue with the older people, because the older people are designing jobs for people who are older. And so the whole way we design jobs is really, really poor. So one of the modules I teach is called Psychology of Work. And what one of the points in there is that most job design is appalling. That it's not designed. So you create a job and people apply for a job, and actually you're trying to fit all the time square pegs into round holes. And we've got really bad job design the world over. So what's happening is we're designing a job and saying we want you to achieve this, but then we're doing that from a 50, 60-year-old kind of, head of department who's decided how the thing's going to run. And 20-year-olds don't work like that. And so we're not fitting. So it's not the fact they can't cope with working at home. What they can't cope with is the jobs we're designing for them. So what we need to do is completely radically change job design to suit the way they work. But most businesses aren't doing that. Most businesses are saying what we need to do is change them to fit the jobs that we're doing. And when you think about the jobs we're doing, so all those businesses that I've said could shut down and they're finding they can work from home, but they can't do everything from home because what they're trying to do is recreate the office in people's houses. They've got to think differently. That's sustained innovation. That's not working. That's how we're going to run our business when everybody works from home with the kids coming home from school. How are we going to run our business when it's different? We've got to really radically, it's no good saying we take PepsiCo and everybody works at home and we can discover it works okay. No. How do we run PepsiCo when we've never had offices? Think completely differently. What way do we design jobs? How do we design marketing jobs for PepsiCo when we've got people who are only going to work 2 hours a day and one of those hours is going to be 11:30 at night? How do we run that's where we need to start thinking from. And what many businesses are trying to do is to recreate the office at home. That's sustained innovation. That ain't going to work.
It's interesting you say that, Graham, because I found with let's call it our younger employees that they are just lost without structure, and so we're desperate to get back into the office because they don't have the same sort of discipline that older people are used to. And I just said, it sounded really quite callous. So I'm not paying you for the hours that you're working or you think you're working. I'm paying you for what comes out of you in those hours. So if you have to work till midnight, but you're going for a run during the day, as long as you always respond to the client or whatever, that's what I'm paying. I'm paying for you for what you're actually producing. And so the challenge for me is to actually, how do I measure what you are producing? I'm not interested in the hours that you're working, because if somebody's got a baby, I mean, what we're finding now with families, all the distractions they've got, we understand that. And so the offices now become a haven. So Pippa is working in the office, and we just said the offices will just be an opportunity for you to go and work, but not everybody can go back working at their desks anymore. No. So we want more efficiency, but the younger people are finding that they are really struggling without that structure in their day.
Yes, so your challenge is to how do you provide that structure when they need complete flexibility as well?
Yeah, well, they don't necessarily need complete flexibility, but what we're saying is they can choose and we can mentor them. But the reality is they want a bit of both and probably want to be able to pop into the office just to give them some sort of foundation to hang on to, as it were.
Yeah, so that's about how do we design our offices then?
Yeah.
So do we turn it all into big open plan with, fashionable, comfy seating, because they're not going there to do work. They're going there to do something else. They're going there to get the social experience. They're going there to get the that structure, to learn something, to have an informal meeting before they go back home and do the work. So do we need to redesign offices? All those kind of things are things we need to think about. Sarah, I gave a very long answer and you waved at me.
I'm just going to sort of reiterate a little bit more what Sarah mentioned about the osmosis side of it. We literally took an estimator on 2 days before lockdown. So we'd interviewed quite thoroughly, we thought, took him on. And as regards to pricing work, I believe there's a lot of osmosis needed, because it's while they're in the office, you talk about things, you bounce things around, and he's been working from home and we haven't had that. And we've also discovered possibly that his personality doesn't lend to that, definitely not remotely, so it might be even a struggle in the office. So we've been quoting work, possibly not winning it because it's more expensive, because he's been presuming things. And so that's the side that we're almost getting to the point now. We're going to say to him, come into the office, we can do it safely, but we need that to be able to just interact. And I don't know how you're going to do that remotely either. No, and that other people in a similar situation, like sales forces, you know, somebody who's taken on to, you know, a road-based sales force will learn by talking to other salespeople, and they'll go out with other salespeople and and they can't do that anymore. So that kind of osmosis. So that's down to then, okay, that's now, so that's difficult, but do you need to recruit different kinds of people who are able to work remotely than the people you currently employ, who were people, the main reason people have a job, surprisingly, is not money. In fact, when we look at the list of what reason people have a job, money is 12th on the list of 20. So actually the salary you pay is not really relevant to most people. As long as they can pay their bills, they're generally happy. What the number one reason people go to work is to be social, to be with other people. And so, okay, that's personality based. Yeah. So the introverted, really introverted people will probably try and find a job they can do on their own. But most people want to be with other people. So the reason most people go to work is simply to be with other people. So if we think of that, actually how we structure jobs, maybe going to work becomes just the social bit, the office bit becomes the social bit, and then we can manage that socially distanced. And then we can have the osmosis happening in that social bit. So the office no longer becomes where we go to work. It becomes where we go to be social with our work colleagues, because we can't do that as easily using Zoom. So that's what I mean about completely rethinking the way we do business to disrupt what we're doing, to take advantage of what's going to happen. Matt's waving now.
Sorry, can I just pick up on that? Sorry, Maxine, you picked on you picked on a point about one of the only things I remember from my science class. Isn't it it's the passing of a lighter substance or water through a semi-permeable membrane. That's about the only thing I remember from school. So anyway, just
how useful has that been to you in your career?
Just picking up on that point. I mean, I'm in the process during lockdown of writing another book, which is why 1 in 3 salespeople fail.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think there's a lot here about so whether it's staff or whether it's clients wanting something or needing something, and then wherever that knowledge resides, if, for example, in our businesses, it resides within the company or key critical individuals, but like Mike with their expert people, I think a lot of where we're going to be looking for is the gap is in the middle, is in the execution and the onboarding and the journey to knowledge transfer from where that real knowledge resides to whether that's the staff or whether that's whoever the consumer of that knowledge is. So I think there's a path on there which is digitizing that information, but also obviously factoring the human interaction along that line. Your point on the sales team, I mean, I've long been onboarding of salespeople is generally appalling. And that's part of what I'm kind of writing about as well. So clarity of communication, expectation, almost like speed. I wouldn't say spoon feeding, but actually giving timely, relevant information to people along whatever journey they happen to be on.
Yeah, and I think, we give people a job description and we say, and if it's sales, here's your patch, here's your target, here's a list of people to contact, off you go, kind of thing. And there's very little kind of that osmosis thing. There's very little integration of the technology. You maybe have, an hour's training on your CRM system, but all of that is kind of scratching at the edges of what we really need to do. Because when I talk to people who are using their CRM system, they don't really know how to use it. They're just filling in boxes because they've not had proper training in what we're going to do with that data and why we're going to do it. And so we're technologically largely incompetent in many areas. And so I think lockdown has exposed that many businesses, I know people who have been furloughed simply because they can't cope with working at home because they haven't got technological skills. So they can't do Zoom. They simply don't know how to log in. All they know how to do is go to a website and write something in Word. And even then, they're probably using 1% of the features in Word. Most people only use about 10% of what's in Word.
It's so true, because I had a meeting. I had to go and talk to digitally. I had to talk to a set of doctors over in Hastings, and so they said, well, maybe we'll do a Skype call. And I said, that's fine. We'll do a Skype call. We'll have a Teams call. We'll have a Zoom call. Whatever you want. And then the practice manager got in touch with me, and I said, well, I can see you there, but I can't see you and I can't hear you. Anyway, she phoned me and said, I realise I've got no camera and I've got no microphone.
Not a good start, really, is it?
I mean, I've been using it for 4 years in terms of like our Yorkshire doctors. We have meetings, they love it. So I no longer have to drive up to Yorkshire to see them. And it's people have got used to the convenience of having digital connections. So that's the other thing from us. Our geographical area, although people, like you say, people are going to do local, actually, if we can actually communicate the experience of dealing with us is something that people might want to have, they might want to engage with us in a far larger geographical area than currently do.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I suppose, and I always sort of think of people like Sarah, Neil, Judy, from the building construction area. It's the challenge is that communicating the emotion, communicating. Yeah. People like to deal with people. So even though your product might be brilliant, how do you communicate that digitally if you are going to have fewer opportunities to do that face to face? And I think this is sort of like Matt talks about, is that the ability to communicate the benefit of using you is going to be even harder now, and it's going to be even more important that you think through how do you communicate that experience factor.
Absolutely. Was that Sharon waving at me, or no?
No, I was turning my video. I had a call, so I turned it back on.
I just saw your hand go up. I thought you were waving at me.
Neil, you're very quiet behind your camera there. You got any comments?
No. I'm listening intently. Obviously, it's quite difficult for us because we're very manufacture based. So, we are pretty much all back at work. So we're just having to get on with it in a socially distanced way. We're having an awful lot more telephone calls, but the construction industry, well, we're still a bit backward.
Don't worry, you're not alone.
But it's absolutely fascinating to get an insight into this and open up my imagination.
Being backward, as you call it, is actually a massive opportunity for you, because the gap is there, the opportunities, and if you like, the scope of innovation is clearer to you now than possibly it's been before, because if it's not what you're doing, you're much more aware of what other people are doing, and you can actually be very targeted and specific as you decide what you are going to move forward in, rather than you won't have too much trial and error because there's so much evidence-based data there. for you to draw in and use as you then plan yourselves forward. So I think it's a huge opportunity for you by being backward, as you call it.
Yeah, I'd agree, Sarah, that before lockdown, I was with a company and I said to them, frankly, your technology is useless. And they had to admit they hadn't really done anything other than minor upgrades for about 15 or 20 years. And so they were way behind their competitors and other people in that sector. And I said, why haven't you invested? Why have you not done this? And they've got all kinds of reasons why they hadn't bothered. And I said, actually, this is a fantastic opportunity, because your competitors who upgraded stuff a year ago are not going to want to upgrade now, because they said we need 3-4 years to get our investment back. So actually, you've got effectively a blank sheet to start again. And so when you are backward in technology, actually now you're in a fantastic place. So Mike's doctor who hadn't got a camera can actually now get a better camera than I've got, because they can go and can start from scratch. So actually, if your technology is not up to much, you've got a huge opportunity now to actually go ahead of the rest of your competitors.
It's interesting because the doctors now are suddenly finding they're not rushed off their feet, because they're having far more digital consultations. So they do need to have those cameras. And for the last 10 years, I've been going on to them about you've got to be arbitraging your appointments with camera appointments. And they used to laugh at me and say, that won't happen. Now it's been forced upon them. And they're suddenly finding they're not having to stay till midnight signing off paper, because they can do a lot of that during the day. Yeah. Because a lot of people aren't coming in because they've never really needed to come in the first place. No. And so they've had change forced upon them. But going back to the construction world, it's a shame Nigel Tilling's not here, because I was hoping he'd be here. Because Neil, I always relate with you and Nigel, where used to say some of the team are so old-fashioned in the way they're thinking in terms of the manufacturing world that it's very hard. So Nigel was astonished when he listened to everybody around the table that they were even concerned what their team thought, because he said, I never get any common sense issued by my team, so I just tell them what to do. So I was hoping that he would actually be on this call, but alas, he didn't accept the invitation. But I think whatever your business, so in yours is bespoke in terms of the window side. It's still communicating the emotion, and there's still all the issues of dealing with you. So where you're dealing with schools and councils and local authorities, sort of government bodies, etc., you can probably do it at a wider base now, just based on the strength of the people you're already dealing with, and somehow capturing that information is about the reliability that you offer to your prospective clients. And you can keep your Luddites back on the factory floor. Nobody can see them.
I see a comment from Angela about knowing who to trust. I'm going to shock you now, okay? But on the internet, there's a lot of dodgy stuff, and there's a lot of stuff where people tell fibs. So one of the things is knowing where to go and who to speak with. And so the way I would always look at that would be to look at, in terms of technology, look at trusted are things like print magazines that have been around for years that are now online in the technology sector, because they have an editorial process. They have to go through. So one of the things that the internet has done to us is it's, for a lot of the time, it's removed editorial process. So this is why we end up with all kinds of problems and issues and conspiracy theories. So we all know, of course, that coronavirus is caused by 5G. Yeah, so, but because that was allowed to be published, because nobody checked it. So some idiot can say anything they like, and then other people share it. And then suddenly people are surrounded by what seems to be correct information, but actually isn't. So one of the things that's really important about the old world before we ended up with the internet world was that everything we read had gone through an editorial process largely. So unless, you know, some local person was just producing leaflets and handing them out, I used to work in just off Oxford Street, and you know, I used to come out of Oxford Circus Tube, and every week was handed a leaflet by this chap who told me the world was ending the next Friday. You know, and there he'd got all the evidence in his leaflet, but of course, as far as I know, it didn't end on that Friday. I think I'm still here, but so but everything else, you know, the free magazines that I was handed as I got out of the tube had been through an editorial process that the writer had to check it, a sub-editor had to check what the writer had checked, the editor had to check what the sub-editor had checked, and things were changed and facts were checked. And so that principle still happens online with those print magazines. So one of the things is finding those print magazines that are now online, most of them, and seeing what they say about technology. So, you know, what are the top 10 cameras? Go to something like PC Mag, which is an online version of a previous print magazine that had been around for 40 years. So it's a well-established, respected, and they're going to go through the editorial process. Whereas you go to Google and say, what are the top 10 cameras? And you end up clicking on the first link. And actually that's just somebody with a load of affiliate links trying to sell you the camera that makes them the most profit, and you end up buying a camera that doesn't work. Whereas the print magazine is actually, the print, now online magazine, is actually doing proper research, and it's gone through an editorial process to make sure that's correct.
Going back to your slides about the false predictions, just to be slightly sort of contra here, there are some scientists that say that actually coronavirus is no longer existent, as in, I can't remember the term they use in the lab. And what I'm saying is I actually do wonder whether it is not as powerful as it was, that it is actually going to not impact long term, that we will actually get back to a former sense of kind of normality that doesn't involve the real fear of coronavirus that we've lived through. However, through this exercise, I do think business has changed permanently, and it will never ever go back to what it was. But I'd love it if you were presenting in, I don't know, 5 years' time, and you added to the examples the coronavirus predictions that we would always be living in fear of it. And I just hope, above hope, that some of the scientists that are saying actually it is now mutating into something that is no longer as dangerous as it was, and that will continue to a point of insignificance. It would be wonderful if that is something that could be added to a slide presentation in 5 years' time.
Okay, I'll remember that in hopefully 5 years' time. I did. Science is science because it's never right. Yeah, one of the things about that we need to get right about science, in a sense, is that science is never true, because it's always trying to find the next development of that. So actually, we've got to remember that science can be wrong as well as it can be right. So even though a group of scientists think that this is right, remember 500 years ago, the world's top scientists at the time said the earth was flat. So science can sometimes be wrong. I remember when I was first at university, I had the reader in physiology, so kind of, you know, one of the most senior members of the academic staff was doing his research trying to prove that DNA did not exist. And he was quite convinced about it, that DNA did not exist. Well, we now know, of course, that he was wrong, and that DNA does exist. But, you know, so science could be wrong as well as if can be right. And don't always believe the chief medical officer either. I interviewed the former chief medical officer several years ago. This will tell you how long ago it was, when he told me with absolute certainty that there was no way ever that AIDS would arrive in the UK. It was impossible for British people to get AIDS. And so I quoted him on that at the time when I wrote an article from what he told me. So he was absolutely convinced on the science then that AIDS was going to be simply restricted to San Francisco and would never escape.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm conscious of the time. So, Graham, that's absolutely fantastic. I knew it would be. So you'd get us all thinking, and love the fact that we've been able to do so much interaction. So always remember www.grahamjones.co.uk, where amazing blogs, which and sort of newsletters that come out there. And also, I shouldn't really say that, but Graham is always very good at answering emails. So if ever you've got any questions, do that. But I would recommend Graham's newsletters are all planned so far in advance. When he's talked to us before, he's talked about how you schedule your social media campaigns, and you've got it all planned. And I'm sure Graham has written them all a year ahead, so that's why they are always appearing. You know, so how he keeps them fresh and relevant when he's written them so far ahead, I just don't know. But well worth tuning into, and I'm sure we would get you back. Next meeting in a month's time, where Pippa will follow up, is another old dinosaur from the speaking brigade, a chap called Will Kintish. And I said to him, Kintish, you're not still talking about networking now that everybody's online? And he said, even more so than ever. He said that networking is so important, but it's got to be done the right way. He said, because people have got no idea. And I thought, I have to get him on. He's going to be entertaining, if certainly not challenging. So next meeting with Will Kintish, and then we'll just sort of keep always just speakers to help challenge the way we're thinking, because I think Graham's done this very effectively. And Graham, thank you for allowing us to record it, which we'll put up and share amongst our members. And we look forward to welcoming you back in the not too distant future. So thanks again. And
thank you.
Conscious of the time, everybody, so you can be back at your desk controlling these millennials that are uncontrollable, and the Generation Z who are even more uncontrollable. I don't have any of this nonsense. I want to find somebody with a whip to crack them into shape. They all think they've got a divine right to quality of life. Well, bloody hell, they're getting quality of life now, and they're causing all sorts of problems because of their lack of structure. And of course, it's the employers to blame, as always. So I don't hold with any of that, as you can tell, and wish Nigel Tilling was here to help and support me. But I say it with caution in front of such a knowledgeable person like Graham, who's used to my dinosaur tendencies. So thank you very much, Graham, and thank you, everybody, for your contribution, and look forward to seeing you again in the very, very near future. Okay.